It's a warm Valentine's afternoon at the Sparty statue. Yet as the sun moves down, a student, Evan Katz of West Bloomfield, took a knee and offered a somber prayer for the students he didn't know but feels a deep connection to anyway.
To think that those are possible classmates, our teammates that we work with on a daily basis, our friends, our people that we talk with even for 4 seconds on a bus ride, it hurts. It's a hard day right now.
It started small here, a few bundles of flowers left. As the afternoon wore on, though, the pile grew larger and larger, the crowd even more so, and a sign showed up with a new slogan, Spartan Strong. MSU junior Olivia Myers of Grand Rapids could only think of what she could give today.
My parents sent me flowers and it just didn't feel right to have them for myself, so I just wanted to come out here and contribute to the memorial.
Sophomore Avonlea Blenkhorn summed up the entire exercise in a few words.
I decided to bring 3 roses. I brought one for each student killed.
Student teacher Traxel Jurgen said everyone he knows is feeling this way.
I thought this was the least we could do. It's a show of support, show of unity, and that's what Michigan State needs right now.
Paula Garcia of Miami is a sophomore with tears in her eyes.
It's just an unfortunate day, and it's one day that's supposed to be about love and caring about each other, so it felt like the right thing to do, to pay our respects for the lives lost.
I am angry right now, but I still am grieving for my peers who we've lost last night, and so I felt the need to pay my respect to them and their families.
Students hugged and cried and struggled to find meaning in this terrible loss. Few were able to. Evan gave it one last try.
This campus is so big. You really, I don't know. I'm at a loss of words. Yeah, it's very difficult.
Now, I'm going to read to you what that little cardboard sign said. It said, we are stronger than this act of hatred. We are family. Be there for each other. Rest in peace to those innocent souls. This must not define us, but it must inspire us because something has to change. We are Spartan Strong. And so you can see more and more students now are gathering out here, many of them leaving flowers, some just standing and watching, bringing their pets and so forth. One thing that we just saw is that a number of students were walking suitcases by here on their way out of town. Many of the students told us that they're going home. Paula there that we spoke with from Miami, her parents sent her plane ticket. She's flying back to Miami for the weekend because so many of these students here have had such a rough time and they don't really want to be here right now to spend this much thinking about it. They want to be with family and friends. So many of them are in fact packing up and leaving as they don't expect classes to come back until Monday. So Christy, with that, we'll send it back to you.
Yeah, I mean, Rod, first off, I feel like I wanted to go out there and give Evan a hug, and that kind of public display of grief and community gathering is so important in this process, and I know that you know that of having been at a lot of different tragedies like this. I'm going to be very interested to see, and you told us a little bit about what some of the students are feeling about coming back and staying through the spring, and what their thoughts are on that. Were some of the kids talk to you about that?
Well, it didn't sound to me like they were abandoning school. I just think that they were looking for some time away to sort of refresh and rejuvenate. I mean, let's face it, these are kids whose only real concern should be whether the Spartans make it into March Madness, whether they've read the book that they need to have read for next week, or done the assignment that they're supposed to have done. This shouldn't be what they should be worrying about, and yet here they stand. And so they're trying to figure out ways to cope with this. And many of them don't want to talk about it. I will tell you that. We've approached many, and they just weren't able to. They didn't want to talk about it, and they didn't talk about it, wouldn't talk about it. Some spoke to us and came back and said, look, I just don't think we should put that on TV. I don't want that emotion out there. But one of the women who said that to us did tell us that she has a friend that when she was holed up on the floor of her closet last night, kept texting and never heard back from. And she believes he may have been one of the victims, but when we asked her for the name, she couldn't say, or actually she wouldn't say. But she is deeply saddened by all of this, as all of these students are. And so they're doing the best they can to figure out a way to cope. And for many, stepping away is probably their best answer. Yeah,
and taking a break. It's completely understandable that someone would want to talk, Rod. I understand, I know you're heading to Sparrow now, hospital?
Yes, we're going over to the hospital. We'll be checking in with them. You know, they had talked about perhaps doing a press conference this afternoon, but now they say that they are not going to do one. So the hospital hasn't been saying much, but what they have been telling us is what we'll be discussing when we get on the air at 4 o'clock.
All right, sounds good, Rod. Rod Maloney, live in East Lansing, right there at Sparty. Thanks so much, Rod. I appreciate always your compassion and the way you help tell everyone's story out there. Thanks so much. We'll see you in a little bit at 4 o'clock. You know, every student, and you heard some of them there, seems to have a story as to where they were when asked to shelter in place, when they got those texts. Some even heard the shots. One student who was on the Today Show this morning was in history class in Berkey Hall when the gunman opened fire from behind her. Go ahead and take a look.
I was sitting and my professor was lecturing, and then I heard, like, it was either 3 or 4, like, really, I could hear gunshots, like, directly behind my head, and I could see the smoke, like gunpowder or something from the weapon firing, and then I could smell, and immediately I dropped to the floor with all my classmates, and someone was yelling that there was a shooter, and everybody needed to get down on the ground. And at that moment, I thought that I was going to die. I was so scared. If it weren't for my classmates helping everyone, I don't think that we would have all made it, because immediately someone was like, we need to break open this window, we need to break open this window. There was a boy in my class, and he was waiting outside the window, and he was catching people and helping people down, and I'm so grateful that he was there to help people out of the window so they wouldn't fall and they could run away. And as soon as I fell out of the window, I kind of like hit the ground a little, and then I didn't have my laptop and I didn't have my textbook. I just grabbed my backpack and my phone, and I just remember I just ran for my life. I didn't know where the guy was. I assumed he was somewhere in the vicinity. I just kind of looked around and just ran, and that's what my other classmates did as well when they were exiting. They just kind of ran in all sorts of directions.
And she's talking about what happened to her at Berkey Hall. That was the scene of the first shooting where 2 people were killed there. The gunman then went to the MSU Student Union where 1 student was killed there. And as we continue to watch this investigation unfold, it takes a lot of coordination from all police agencies. And to give us an idea of how that is working today and what investigators will be processing and working on, joining me is Andy Arena from the Detroit Crime Commission, and he's also a former FBI special agent in charge here in Detroit. Andy, it's good to see you. Give people a sense of what investigators will have to look through today, as we know everything is still cordoned off at these 2 crime scenes, and then making sure each agency is working in conjunction with each other with what their strengths are.
So there's obviously a lot of agencies up there on campus, on scene. Everybody's bringing different resources to bear. As you just said, I mean, it starts with the crime scenes. They're processing those. It's a meticulous situation. They've got to really take their time and go through these. There's obviously multiple crime scenes. But beyond that, you know, trying to figure out the motive of this individual, interviewing his neighbors, his family, what friends he may have had. You know, we all understand there was a note found with his body. So trying to decipher that. And then also, you know, his residence, and particular attention is going to be his computer, right? What was he looking at? What was he Googling? What social media activity did he have? So, you know, it's a puzzle, and they're just kind of putting all these pieces together to really paint a picture of what caused this individual to go onto the campus of Michigan State last night and do what he did.
I think sometimes we all instantly want to know. We want to be able to put it in a tidy box and understand. Give us a sense of how long do you think this process might be to be able to go through some of those steps and really track down and find out?
I was talking to some folks earlier today, and they were saying, why don't we know? And, we live in the 24-hour news cycle where we have this insatiable appetite for information. And I explained to them, look, this is not a TV show. This is not an episode of NYPD Blue where, taking out the commercials, they're going to solve the crime in 48 minutes. They have to do this right. They have a lot of information, a lot of coordination going on right now. So we just have to be patient and wait for the answers to come out. And I think it's, if you're looking for a timeline, it may take a day, it may take a week to get the full picture. But I'm going to guess within the next day or so, we're going to have a pretty good picture of what caused this.
Andy, can you give me a sense of what the FBI expertise is on the ground at a scene like this?
So there's a couple of different things. They have evidence response teams, highly trained. They have a lot of different equipment that they can bring in, as does the Michigan State Police. So when you have multiple crime scenes like this, it's the better, the more you have, the better. But beyond that is the analytical capabilities. The FBI has a cadre of intelligence analysts. They have tools. They can look at his phone. They can look at his computer and try to figure out, what was this guy looking at? Who was he talking to? Is there somebody else out there that may be involved? I'm going to guess not, but they have to cross, they have to put a line through that on the to-do list. So, they're bringing a lot of resources, as are the Michigan State Police and all the other agencies involved.
It feels like everybody saw something or heard something. Or how do investigators go about tracking down maybe some of the students who might have been witnesses at this point, and that interview process of trying to extract as much information from those two scenes as possible?
So that's going to be one of the more difficult aspects of this, because as we just heard, a lot of these students are getting out of there, right? And rightfully so. They're going back to their homes. And so tracking down who was actually in a classroom, who was at the student union, that's going to be really difficult to, who was actually there. So I think they're going to have to rely on a lot of these students coming forward and certainly volunteering. But, I think they're going to have enough fairly quickly here to kind of paint the picture of what caused this individual to do this.
And really looking at social media, too. All you have to do is go on TikTok and on Instagram, but mostly a lot of TikTok, and kids are telling their stories there. And we've kind of talked about the double-edged sword of social media, how it can work well, and then how it can also be its own trauma of sorts, because we know that, I mean, even as a parent, people listening in real time to police scanners last night and hearing shooting at IM East, hearing different things that were not true, but part of a process when police are going through things as quickly as possible and trying to set up perimeters.
You're exactly right, Lee. The scanners and social media are double-edged swords. So first with the scanners, that's raw intelligence going out. There's a lot of misinformation, but law enforcement has to respond. They have to make sure that there's not an issue at a certain location. Parents that were listening to that, I'm sure they're traumatized by it. But from a law enforcement standpoint, they need that raw information. Social media is the same thing. There was so much misinformation going around. I mean, as you said earlier, there were multiple shooters and multiple locations, and the reality was it wasn't. But it just causes chaos, really, and a lot of consternation that didn't need to happen. But that's the world we live in, right? Social media and police cameras are not going away.
Give me a sense, Andy. We know that class will not be open until on Monday, and your kids and parents will need to decide for themselves how they want to move forward. But in terms of investigation-wise, can we expect Berkey and the union to be shut down, until further notice, in terms of when police have to go through and make sure that a scene is secure and done with?
Well, it's really hard to say. It's going to be done when it's done. I remember the underwear bomber case of 2009. Delta Airlines at the time, Northwest, wanted their airplane back. And I had explained to them, look, it's a crime scene. When we're done with it, I'll give it back to you and you can put it in the air. But right now, we got to make sure we do everything and get that, because you got one shot at this, right? And so it's really hard to say how long it's going to take. But when they're done, they'll be done.
Last question for you, Andy. As we watched everything unfold last night, and again, I mean, it's hard to not watch the video of, you see the SWAT teams, you see all the various police agencies, the lights, you know, everyone moving through here. What would you say to us as the general public, having seen that and watched that, to know about the coordination efforts that it took for all of those police agencies to do what they did last night in a relative amount of time, and then how actually our first responders process?
So they train. Look, they've trained for this, and they've trained for this. The reality is, when it comes, the day comes and the bell rings, you can't train for it, right? The real thing is chaos. And what I saw last night, you know, the first responders getting those victims out of there, trying to neutralize the threat, the perimeter, and then the tactical teams going building to building to clear. That was exactly what they're supposed to do, right? And as I said, it's so much more difficult than in a training situation. You really can't recreate that chaos, pressure, and stress that they're going to be under. And I think the response was perfect. I think the Eagles were checked at the door. The agencies brought to bear their resources, and I was pretty proud of what they did.
Andy Arena, we really appreciate the perspective here. Former Special Agent in charge of the FBI Detroit office, and now with the Detroit Crime Commission. Thanks so much, and it's good to see you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Andy. You know, the trauma of what students have gone through, as well as parents in our community, can't be understated. Dr. Rose Moten is a clinical psychologist. She joins me now. Wow, I mean, we're living a day here, and I know that is an understatement. I'm so glad that you're with me, because I think the conversations that we have around our own anxieties moving forward, yes, some of the trauma that we've experienced, even if you weren't on campus, it's a secondary trauma that we see, and then the community grief, all have its own stages of what we need to move through. And I think sometimes people think, am I doing it right or am I doing it wrong? So, we're going to get to all that, but let me just back up and say, as someone who works with kids and families, how are you doing today, and what are some of the phone calls you've been fielding?
So, you know, it's a tough day for us all. As I shared earlier, I was on the phone most of the night with my daughter, who's a student at Michigan, but her best friends are at State. And she's on the phone navigating with them as they're in the dark and hiding. And we got the unfortunate news today that one of the fatalities is actually a friend of hers that graduated from Grosse Pointe North with her.
I am so sorry.
Yes, yes. So that just added another dimension to what we were already experiencing. So it went from, okay, this ordeal is over, let me start helping her. Now I have to help my daughter grieve. Yeah.
And so then you have the professional hat, and then you've got the mother hat as well. What are the first things that we do?
The first things that we do is that we understand, you know, there's no script to this, right? It's not about me fixing it, because grief is supposed to be felt. When we experience a traumatizing event, we have to go through the process of letting all those emotional, that uncertainty that we're feeling, because this is a place these kids have not been before, you know. And it's necessary for us to understand that there are going to be not just physical reactions or emotional reactions they have, there's also going to be plenty of physical reactions that they have.
How does that show up?
So it can show up many different ways. Trauma, first of all, we know these kids were just traumatized last night. They went through that fight or flight.
Yes.
Syndrome. And fight or flight is supposed to be short term. Let me escape.
Right. Let me run from the bear, and then everything, and then your body gets to reset.
And your body, that autonomic nervous system, you know, kicks back in, and you go back to a calm. But we're talking 4 hours, 4 hours of kids uncertain, in the dark, on the floors, you know, not knowing what's going on, hearing sirens. And so they were at this very aroused state for a lengthy amount of time, flooding their bodies with all types of, you know, those stress hormones. And as a result, there could be a lot of physical reactions that they're experiencing today that we don't recognize as a reaction for the trauma.
Like
headaches, stomach aches, even muscular pain, something that we don't associate it with, oh, that's trauma. But you have to understand, again, the tension that I'm sure they were quite contracted, you know, as this was going on, even unaware of that. just appetite disturbances. The list goes on and on. Any physical changes you may notice in your children or even in yourselves, because we're all affected by this too, right? Or even any exacerbation of maybe some physical issues they've already had. That's some things to look out for and to understand it's normal right now. It's normal.
Yeah. You know, I want to talk a little bit about the parents, because I think, you know, as parents, I've got one in college, and you know, we think, and we sometimes bring our anxieties to them, and they're calming us down. Mom, I'm okay. I'm okay. Are you okay? Are you okay? What is it as parents that we should be doing to support our kids, and maybe to make sure, while we tell them that we're human too, and we have feelings, and we're scared too, but how do we keep it in a place that we're not exacerbating their feelings or making it worse?
And as parents, it's our natural tendency, right, to want to make this right,
to make it better.
Make it better. We're going to fix it. We're going to fix it.
Put it in bubble wrap, and then
we're going to fix it. But again, grief and trauma is not meant to be fixed. It's meant to be felt, because that's a necessary part of the process so we can start the healing process. We have to go through the feeling of it. So some things we can do, you know, things that we don't want to say is, it could have been worse, or, you know, things of that sort.
Yeah, it makes it minor. It makes it, oh, it wasn't that bad. I mean, it could have been worse. Of course, of course, the whole world could have blown up. But,
right?
Yeah, it does minimize that feeling. And what are the other kind of, I think, maybe cliches that we hear that we think that make people feel better, but it really doesn't?
Oh, just, you know, again, it's a whole litany of them that we probably want to avoid. That, first of all, we probably want to just rehearse in our head before we let anything come out, because a litany of it is, again, it could have been worse, or constantly asking them, how are you feeling?
Or you'll be fine.
Or you'll
Don't
be
worry about it.
fine,
You'll be
you know,
fine.
or at least you have you don't have to go back to school until next week, because honestly, there are going to be a lot of cognitive issues that these kids are going to have as a result, because when you're traumatized, your cognition is affected as well. So the inability to concentrate, be very empathetic about that. Their emotional regulation is not going to be in sync for some time, maybe for the next couple of weeks. They may be a little snappy. So, you know, we have to give them like a little free pass over the next weeks to come. If you find out they're a little short with you, or if they want some alone time, it's okay for them to have alone time.
I was going to ask you about that, because sometimes we're so fearful if our kids are alone and quiet, you think, what's wrong? Talk to me about the difference of, tell me everything, tell me how you're feeling. You want to be there for them, but it is okay. So the talking is great, but also silence. They're both right.
They're both right. And that's what you said. What's wrong? What's right? Yeah. And it's there are no rights or wrongs, but there are things that we probably want to be more aware of that we're typically not aware of because we haven't been here before, right? And so really allowing them, if your child needs some alone time, if they feel like going alone in their room or just taking some time to themselves, allow that. We want to, again, these first few weeks, be very gentle. Now, the weeks to come, when we're talking week 2, 3, 4 weeks in, if you start seeing that there's not a trajectory of things kind of easing up and them getting better over time, that's when we get concerned. But right now, we have to be very kind of just hands-on, but at the same time, not too overbearing and wanting your child to, and I keep calling them children because they're our children, even though we know that most of them are adults, but they're still our children. You know, we have to, and that's a good point. Let me just say this. They want to claim their independence in adulthood, but last night, all those kids, my daughter's friends who were, they wanted mom, they wanted dad, they wanted parents, they wanted that safe, secure place of home. And so that's the best thing we can do now, is to reassure them, you're safe, you know, you're secure, to provide them with support, but let them lead the conversations. It's okay to ask questions. If they don't feel like talking at the moment, give them that space. Because they're going to, eventually they're going to come and they're going to share with you what they need to share with you at that time.
I think about even all school-age children, we're talking elementary, because again, we had Oxford just happen less than a year and a half ago. And we have kids that go through ALICE training in elementary school. I mean, they know what it means when an active shooter comes into the building and what to do. What if we have children who now, because this happened, they say, I don't want to go to school, or I'm afraid of school, or how do we start to deal with that? Is that when we we have someone like you step
Yes.
in and we say, this is where we're going to get some extra outside help to process fear.
Yeah, that's a real possibility. It's understandable now that they don't want to go back because it's triggering.
Right.
So also to understand for some time, and it could possibly be for the rest of their lives, but it won't be to the same extent that it is now. There'll be certain things that will be triggering to them. Earlier when I was coming in the station, there was a police car, you know, going by with their sirens.
Yeah.
So that's going to be something that's triggering for them.
Yeah.
Flashbacks, things of that sort. There's so much unknown and it's all individual because our children who before this even happened may have suffered, especially coming out of the pandemic. We know exponentially
that's
so
what
many
I kind of
kids.
feel.
Yeah.
Like these kids
have gone through it.
Yeah.
These kids have gone through it. You know, they pandemic saw just ridiculous, you know, unprecedented numbers of children from hospitalizations, psychiatric hospitalizations to needing mental health care where there were wait lists for months, anxiety and depression. And so kids who are just recovering or still maybe reeling from dealing with that, coping with what occurred during the pandemic, this, you know, when you're faced with a new trauma, oftentimes it can wake up and exacerbate an old one.
If you have, especially if maybe you dealt with it, but maybe you didn't deal with it. And I think that's it's so difficult. Let me ask you this about collective grief and about, you know, we just saw Rod Maloney was out at Sparty and they had started to do a memorial there. People are putting flowers there. In every kind of tragedy you see, people find a place where they can go to, you know, where that is and show that they're thinking. We see it on social media.
Yes.
Is that a good thing? Is that part of what we need as a collective community to come together to one place to see it?
Absolutely. That is so important. And this is great advice for the parents as well. So if your child wants to participate in something like that, do not, you know, I'm sure parents at this point is like, no, you don't want to, you know, go on campus or you don't want to do that. But that's part of the healing process to feel like that there's some universality to this, because right now everyone's dealing with their own individual way of coping with this trauma, but to see, okay, they're experiencing it too, this person's experiencing it, it helps us to, I don't even want to say normalize, because we don't ever want to normalize this.
No, we don't want to normalize it, but it makes it's a bonded thing, because what I don't like to see is trauma comparison, like, oh, I feel horrible. And it's like, well, I was in the building.
Exactly.
And it's like, well, I was here. And it's like, your trauma compared with somebody else's is not, it doesn't matter. It matters how you're dealing with whatever situation that you've been placed into.
And your background. Like, what is your background of trauma in general? Because as I said, that's going to wake up some old traumas as well. There's a strong possibility that can happen with our children, with our, you know, even the staff there that's dealing with this. So community and collective, you know, grieving can be very healing in the process.
I'm so sorry that your daughter was friends with the young woman who went to Grosse Pointe North. And I think about this process now that everyone goes through. It must be a heavy thing on your shoulders right now as a mother.
It is, and she's in constant contact with me, texting me.
That's a beautiful thing.
She saw me on the 12th. She said, "Thanks, Mom. That was really good information you gave." You know, which I probably wouldn't have gotten that any other day. But right now, even our children are looking to make sense of what's going on here with them. So it helps, you know, with me being here with you. It helps to even help the other parents and families out here who are reeling, because there are thousands of families right now who are all dealing with this today.
Yeah. And it's okay to talk about it. It's okay not to talk about it. Everything is normal reaction to a point. Until a couple of weeks, if there is a detrimental pattern that is going down the road, then it would be something that we would seek some help, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Because we have defense mechanisms that help us cope with this. So distraction is a great defense mechanism. Watching a movie to just distract your mind off of it, you know, for 20 minutes at a time. But we don't want weeks down the line for you to still be engaging in these defense mechanisms to deal with it. Yeah.
And as much as we love local news and local information, sometimes it's okay to shut off the television. And I say that as a journalist, so it's a good thing.
Yes.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Rose.
you.
I really appreciate it, and our hearts go out to your daughter and the extended family of friends who are grieving tonight.
Absolutely. You appreciate that.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, you take care.
You too.
Okay. You know, another part of the conversation that we're all having today, of course, we are grieving the 3 students who died in the shooting. There are 5 other students who are hospitalized right now, and the MSU community is really rallying around to support and love each other. But there is another part that people are starting to talk about, and it is gun violence, and it is what can be done to stop the rash of shootings. Again, this is the 2nd school shooting in Michigan in about 14 months, and the trauma cannot be understated. It is the anniversary of the Parkland shooting today. So while we stop for a moment and we wrap our arms around the people that we love, there are people that are calling for action. And where the action will come will be in some kind of legislation. It will be in some kind of lawmaking, and that happens in Lansing. Joining me now by Zoom is Senator Mallory McMorrow. Senator McMorrow, thank you so much for joining me. You know, first off, I want to just ask you, I guess, your reaction and your thoughts that you want to send out to the Michigan State community right now.
Yeah, it's just absolutely devastating. You know, I think about the kids who survived, as you've noted, the Oxford High School shooting, only to be reliving this nightmare again. One of the students who was killed was a student from my community, from Clawson High School, and it's just tragic. So I want every kid, every family who's impacted to know we hear you, we see you. Please reach out to us if you just want to talk, if you want a story to share, so that we can take action for you.
You know, I also saw you on social media as well, you know, put out a retweet someone. There is a young woman who is a student at Michigan State who survived Sandy Hook as a small child. And I think, again, seeing that this generation is now surviving multiple school shootings is something that it stops everyone. It's rather staggering.
It is, and I'm somebody, I lost a friend in the Virginia Tech shooting, and to be able to talk to these kids or talk to these parents and say, genuinely, I know what you're going through, shouldn't be a shared experience. This shouldn't be something that is so common. And I also want to point out just everyday gun violence. It's all of these mass shootings and school shootings that get the news and they bring us all together in collective grief. But there are tragedies happening every single day. And this is a moment where I think we can wrap around our arms around everybody and say, we've got to do better.
All right, so when we say we've got to do better, let's get into it, because I think we look at legislation and we can all agree that this is horrible, but can we agree on what can be done to stop it? What are the conversations that you're having today in Lansing about common sense gun reform in Michigan?
So we've been having conversations for years, well before my time in the legislature. Some of the legislation that we are working on has been developed for the past 10 years, including things like safe storage laws, extreme risk protection orders, commonly known as red flag laws, magazine capacities, universal background checks, and many of the things that we're talking about have very broad support. Polls show 80 to 90% of Americans agree that these are common sense measures we should pursue together. And in this political climate, I think you're hard pressed to find nearly anything that 80 to 90% of Americans agree on. So now that we have a Democratic majority, we are in conversations with our caucus. We have been all day about the steps we need to take to get many of these bills ready for reintroduction so that we can start moving on them.
Would you introduce them as a group, or is there certain ones that you would put there first?
I think you'll see in the coming days. I mean, this is a lot of work goes into these bills. We have introduced, as I said, these bills year after year after year but there are a lot of other states who have enacted many of these laws that we can learn from. So we're going through the process now of vetting them with first responders, police departments, emergency room doctors, teachers, those who have been impacted, and experts from all around the country. So as they come out, I think you'll see them introduced as sets, but we also want to make sure that we're showing people that we are taking action. So even though legislation takes time, we want to be thoughtful and strategic on when we put things out.
So if this has been, and we've seen these conversations happen in Michigan, and you said for 10 years or more, what are the sticking points? What are Republicans specifically pushing back on that they don't want to pass them?
You know, there's always been this argument that it rubs up against the Second Amendment, and this has been so frustrating for me. I spoke with Raina St. Juliana last year, the sister of one of the kids who was killed in the Oxford High School shooting. And these kids, I mean, they've been through the worst of it, and they're so brave to come to Lansing and to advocate for themselves and ask for gun violence legislation. They were previously promised that we would have hearings on red flag bills. The previous Senate Majority Leader said yes and lied to her. And that to me is unacceptable. So we have to accept that these things can coexist. The Second Amendment and the right of these kids to live and be safe in their communities and in their schools. Responsible gun ownership is key. And this legislation is about making sure we have the tools to keep guns out of the hands of people who should not have them.
Yeah, you're talking about the advocacy group No Future Without Today that was started with students at Oxford High School, and I know that they have been working hard to try to get their voices heard, because sometimes we have these arguments above and not really talking to the young people who has impacted. So we're talking about that, you know, Democrats have the majority, you have the trifecta now in Lansing. Is this the key issue coming off of this? And I know that there are a lot of key issues on the agenda, but do you think that that is going to be the next thing that we're going to be seeing coming out of the legislature?
Yes, I do. This is a major issue. This has been an issue, not just something that I think every time these events happen, there's a reaction that you're introducing legislation as a gut reaction to what just happened. But that's not true. The reality is we have worked on this legislation and introduced it and reintroduced it and reintroduced it. This is something that all of our voters have been asking for, that all of us ran on, is to pass common sense gun reform. So you will see it as very likely the next priority that will come before the legislature. All
right, State Senator Mallory McMorrow, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon as we continue our coverage. Is there anything else that you wanted to share here today as we continue to think about the community at Michigan State?
Just we're with you and we see you, and to any kids who are really struggling right now, everything you're feeling is valid. If you want to reach out and talk to somebody, please reach out, find resources. This is a really, really hard time, but we see you and we're in it together.
All right, we're going to check back in with you in the coming days. I really appreciate your time. You take care, okay?
Thank you.
State Senator Mallory McMorrow in Lansing, talking about what the next priority is going to be for the legislature. Because again, when we talk about gun reform, and you know, we can talk about it at the federal level, it is really going to be if you're changing something here in the state, and it's going to have to come through the legislature. So we're going to be watching in the next weeks to come there. Again, we are going to be continuing our coverage of the shooting at Michigan State University. We have been on for most of the day, and from when it happened last night here on Local 4. We know that this is not an easy day for many people in the community, whether it is that you have a student up there, you're a student yourself, and I think for all of us who have pride in the Michigan State community. I'm a Michigan State alum. I can picture the insides of those buildings. I had a class at Berkey Hall and used to hang out at the Student Union quite a lot, playing pool in the basement. But we can visualize where these things happened, and they were places of joy and of community. And it's very difficult today to see all the police and to know that we lost 3 students and 5 others are still in the hospital fighting for their lives. Devin Skillian is actually live in East Lansing tonight for us. Devin, you were on all last evening, kind of guiding us through an ever-changing journey, and you're back on campus there today. How are you?
Really tired of covering these kind of stories. Absolutely just sick of it. It's just too much. I don't know how we keep putting this on our young people the way we do, especially those who've now been through this. We keep talking about this sort of Oxford group that then made their way to Michigan State. It's just asking too much of our young people, I think. And it's a really strange scene here today. It's kind of eerie. We're right in front of the Union here, which is usually, of course, a humming place of activity on any normal day on a college campus. It is really quiet here, more police cars than anything else still. And a massively, I don't know if you can make it out behind me, but a massively long stretch of crime tape that runs basically the length of this block and all the way around the building. There are a few people coming and going into the Union, but they're coming with FBI and police escorts because a lot of people had to drop a lot of students had to kind of drop their stuff and run. They are now being escorted in to retrieve their belongings, backpacks, phones, whatever they may have had to leave as they left last night. But they've got to be escorted in, and then they're, in some cases, I was just watching one FBI agent walk a student all the way back to his dorm, talking to him all the way along. So a really, really tough day here. And we just know that the students who are coming here to get their things, they're the ones who saw a lot of the worst of it. They were right there in the Union when the shooting started, Christy.
Yeah, and I can only imagine that is how investigators are also piecing together a lot of things. You think about trying to track down the students who ran from the Union, who ran from Berkey Hall. Well, they left their belongings behind. And so they have to, if they want to try to get it back, and then that's when investigators can get some of that, crucial information. Devin, it strikes me when I see you standing there on campus, everything we were watching last night as it was unfolding, it was so dark. It was really hard to get perspective of, where the buildings were in relation to each other. And if you're not familiar with campus, Ian, you could only imagine what law enforcement was going through in trying to coordinate locking down two scenes, putting a perimeter up. We have a better view today, knowing that that's all blocked up in that loop, that circle loop. If you're familiar with the campus, you come around and you hit Berkey and you hit the Union.
Right. And in fact, one of the things that the daylight does is it shows you, just right down the block here, this big wooded area. And there are wooded areas all over this campus, one of the largest campuses of any American university. But there's just so many different places, especially at night, where someone could hide. Places that needed to be searched. You needed an arm, and they did. They had this army of law enforcement that was out here doing everything they could to kind of try to create a perimeter here. But even in creating a perimeter, if you did it around the university, it is such a massive area, 5,000 acres, just so much ground to cover. And you're right, Christy, in the dark at night, it was a really tall order. I suppose that for years we'll be talking about how much worse this all could have been, but it couldn't have been much worse, obviously, if you're among the loved ones. There's 3 students who were killed and 5 who are still fighting for their lives in the hospital.
Absolutely, and I think that one of the things that also strikes us is how quickly, once Michigan State Police, Michigan State University Police released the surveillance picture of the suspect out onto social media and to the general media, that a tip came in right away and they were able to move on that.
Another tricky thing, we were talking about this last night. You're wanting people to be on the lookout for a person, even as you're ordering them to shelter in place,
right,
and to not leave where they are. So it really was a very, very complicated law enforcement sort of process and drill to undergo last night to try and figure out the way to proceed with this. And that's what I mean. Maybe we should be counting our blessings that it wasn't even worse than it already was, because just how awful. And especially we know that 4 of the 5 who ended up going to the hospital ended up going right into surgery, all 5 still in critical condition. So this of course could still manage to get worse.
Yeah. All right, Devin, give us a sense of what you're working on and where you'll be for 4, 5, 6 and beyond, really.
Right here, obviously, in front of the Union, we've got our reporters fanned out not only across East Lansing, but now, sadly, we know the addresses and the hometowns of those 3 students who were lost. So we'll be in Grosse Pointe and Clawson as well. because and we as always, we want to spend a lot more time talking about the families of the victims and these lovely young people who were lost. Spend more time on them than we will on the suspect or the shooter in this case. I hope we'll be doing that over those 90 minutes. That's certainly our aim, but we'll have that for you actually more than 90 minutes because we'll start it up coming up here at 4 o'clock.
Yeah. All right. Devin Skillian live out there in East Lansing. Say a big hello to the campus that I love so much for me, will you please?
Yeah. No, Christy, yeah.
All right.
So hard on all the alumni like you who take this very, very personally.
Yeah. All right. Thanks so much, Devin. We will see you starting at 4 o'clock today.
Yeah, you bet.
The aftermath of the shooting at Michigan State University starting at 4 o'clock, but we have much more for you here on Local 4+. And again, know that we have new articles constantly coming out on clickondetroit.com as well. So we appreciate you joining us and linking us up from there as well. You know, Devin talked about the 5 students who are still hospitalized, who are being treated right now for their gunshot wounds. We don't know the makeup of how many men or women yet. We have not, that has not been released to us. But we know that they are being treated, and it was apparently a pretty harrowing night at Sparrow. There was a very emotional press conference from the doctors there earlier this morning, but also Nick Monticelli spent a lot of time on the university campus today, and he has much more for us.
So we are on the backside of Berkey Hall, which is the very first hall that was targeted where 2 students were shot and killed. The opposite end of it is a very busy street. That's where the majority of the traffic comes through here at Michigan State University. There was a press conference earlier today that laid out the most detail that we've seen and heard, and one of those things being that all of the victims are all Michigan State students.
Our Spartan community is reeling today.
Governor Gretchen Whitmer sharing what most Michiganders are feeling today: grief, sorrow, anger, and more. All 8 of the victims are Michigan State students. 3 were killed, 2 at Berkey Hall, the 3rd at Union Hall. The other 5 victims are still in critical condition at Sparrow Hospital. 4 of them needed surgery. The top doc there overwhelmed by the medical teams waiting for the patients.
We had general surgeons, cardiothoracic surgeons, neurosurgeons. Didn't get a lot of sleep last night, sorry. So many people that just came in.
This morning, Michigan State investigators revealing the shooter as 43-year-old Anthony McCrae, who lived in Lansing and had absolutely no ties to MSU.
We have absolutely no idea what the motive was at this point. We can confirm that the 43-year-old suspect had no affiliation to the university. He was not a student, faculty, staff, current or previous. So that's an unknown right now, and that's what we're trying to understand is why this incident occurred.
The photo police released from security cameras became crucial. Someone saw McCrae, recognized him, and called 911. And as MSP troopers got closer, McCrae took his own life, but not before destroying others.
We will get through this together, and we will do it with the full support of the state of Michigan and the U.S. federal government.
Michigan State University has made the announcement that all classes here on campus will be canceled until Monday. They're also saying that campus operations should resume and go back to normal on Thursday. Something else that has been stressed over and over again to the community here is what the interim president said: by honoring their feelings, honoring your feelings, meaning if you need to talk to somebody, a counselor, therapist, somebody in the community, to go ahead and own up to that and say that it's okay to talk to someone and not try to bear those feelings, because that could re-traumatize somebody all over again. In East Lansing, I'm Nick Monticelli. Back to you.
It's so important to have those resources there and available, because we know that those texts went out last night when the shooting started from Michigan State University to every student on campus. It sent out an alert telling them to shelter in place, and it also told them to run, hide or fight. And when you hear that phrase together, it makes sense, but it is a high alert and really, anxiety-producing command. Run if you have to. Hide right now if that's the only thing that you can do, and fight as a last resort. Our crime expert here at WDIV, Darnell Blackburn, talked with Jason Colthorpe about the philosophy behind that and how it all works.
Yeah, and guys, I'm here with Darnell Blackburn, our crime and safety expert, but as a former police officer, not just of any department, you actually worked here at the Michigan State University Police Department. When that call goes out for an active shooter on campus, that has to really hit home for an officer here.
It does. It resonates, and it resonates with me even more as a former police officer, but even before that, being a student here at Michigan State University. So when that call comes out, you rely on your training. You go back to the idea that this is not a drill. It's something that is real, and it's something that you have to respond to right away.
And the shock of what came next came from the MSU Police Department, and that was the bulletin that shots were fired. And of course, this goes to students, and parents also get these notifications. It says there's an active shooter, and then the last line, run, hide, fight. And students, when they get that, that's when they have to take action.
Yeah, that indicates it's not a drill, that this is real, that students need to take cover. They need to move immediately for their safety and run, hide, and fight. Be prepared to fight if they have to, because there is an active threat that's imminent.
And we see that, like in a couple of these places, like the MSU Union behind us, is a unique building. This is the heartbeat of campus. We're talking about lounge areas when you walk in, with several students in every direction. You have a food court. You actually have a bowling alley, conference rooms. A bank is in there. So all sorts of activity in there, which makes it difficult for police to get in there and clear a building like that.
Logistically, it is a challenge, but police are trained. The MSU Police Department is trained, along with their partners, to be able to go in and strategically navigate the rooms, to strategically navigate. And as long as the students they show them their hands that they're compliant, it makes the situation, it's challenging, but it makes it a little more easier to get through.
How difficult, by the way, real quickly, we saw a lot of erroneous reports last night, misinformation both online and called into police, when you have such a large campus like this. And we know the shooter left that door of the Union, came out here, could go anywhere. How difficult does that make for all the departments involved in this?
It makes it extremely difficult. It slows the process down. It gives the shooter more time to elude law enforcement. When people call in erroneous complaints or descriptions of what's going on, it really puts law enforcement in a bad position, and it puts more students in jeopardy as well.
Yeah, we still have a lot to learn about what happened here in East Lansing on Monday night. But Darnell, thanks again for you. It's a unique insight into all of this, and we appreciate it. Guys, back to you in the studio.
Yeah, big thanks to Jason and Darnell. We know now the names of the 3 victims from the shooting last night. Brian Fraser, he went to Grosse Pointe South High School. Ariel Anderson, she went to Grosse Pointe North. And Alexandria Verner, she went to Clawson. Just about an hour ago, the superintendent of the Grosse Pointe Public Schools came out and had a press conference talking about the reaction and the support for the community after losing 2 of their former students. This is Dr. John Dean. Go ahead and take a listen.
This morning, my administrative team were in our different schools. I, in fact, was at Grosse Pointe South High School, when we started to get information from some of our students that it was possible that one of the students at that time, we thought, was potentially a graduate of Grosse Pointe South. We started to talk to our kids. Sometimes kids know stuff before adults do. We reached out to families, and it was confirmed that one of the students that was tragically killed at Michigan State University was, in fact, a 2021 graduate of Grosse Pointe South named Brian Fraser. We immediately shifted into a mode of creating a crisis center at the school, because as a 2021 graduate, there would be current students that knew Brian. There would also be teachers and other staff that had Brian. We quickly learned, same methodology, students talking, Eventually, we talked to a family, and we learned that Ariel Anderson, Grosse Pointe North class of 2021, was also a tragic victim at Michigan State University. I have to tell you, and I put this in my communication, I took this pause and thought to myself, how is it possible? How is it possible that this happened in the first place? An act of senseless violence that has no place in our society, and in particular, no place at school. But then it touched our community not once, but not twice. And now this event that has touched our nation, in fact, is now touching directly our community.
And that's Dr. John Dean, the superintendent of the Grosse Pointe Public Schools, after learning today that 2 of their former students, one student from Grosse Pointe North and one from Grosse Pointe South, were killed last night on Michigan State's campus. We have much more coverage coming up for you on Local 4 News at 4, 5, and 6 o'clock tonight. At 4 o'clock, it is going to be an entire hour. We have new information on the victims. We talked about the ones from Grosse Pointe. We'll also have more information on that victim, Alexandria Verner from Clawson. Also coming an update for you from Sparrow Hospital in Lansing. That's where 5 of the injured students are still there tonight. Hopefully we'll have more for you there. And then we are going to be exploring the connection between Oxford and MSU. There are a number of students who survived the Oxford shooting last year who are now at Michigan State University and again had to go through a shooting situation. So we will have that for you as well. Thanks for joining us so much on Local 4 Plus. I'm Christy McDonald for all of us here on Local 4. Have a great afternoon. We're going to see you in just a few minutes at 4 o'clock.